Hi, welcome again to 36 to Life. I am recording this at 12:36 in the afternoon Eastern Time on Thursday, the 1st of September. We're in the month of Elul, and these conversations at this hour, 36 past, are because 36 is 2 times 18. 18 is the value in numeric value of the Hebrew word chai, which means life, and we're thinking about something short we can learn to help us think back on the life we've led in the last year and think forward to the life of the next year. And for the most part in these conversations, we're looking at teachings about teshuvah, about returning as a metaphor for personal change in Rambam and Rabbi Moses Maimonides. And so we're kind of going forward from where we were in the first chapter of Rambam's Maimonides, Hilchot Teshuvah, his guide to the ideas and practices of teshuvah. One thing I made reference to in one of the two previous ones was that Rambam doesn't teach about tshuva the way we might expect to, which is to see it as a teaching about Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, to think of this as a seasonal thing for the new year. But he teaches it about a fundamental practice of Judaism. It's in the beginning of his code of law, the Mishneh Torah, and it comes after his fundamentals of the Torah and his fundamentals about kind of human character and his teachings about idolatry. And this is a practice that's really at the base of everything, he says, in order to think about all the things that follow that are the practices of daily and annual and throughout the life. That's where Rambam teaches these ideas of tshuva. And so we're looking at chapter 1, and I'll put up on the screen a particular teaching to focus on today. We're looking here at another teaching in chapter 1, and he is shifting from a focus on vidui, which he began with, which is acknowledgments or professions or confessions of wrong, and he's moving on now to a different idea, which is that of kappara or kippur, which we often translate as atonement, Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, but let's take a closer look at that. Afal pi shehatshuva mechaperet al hakol, ve'atzmo shel yom hakippurim mechaper. Even though tshuva, this process of turning back and turning away from wrongs and turning back to goodness, even though it is mechaperet, it does kippur or kappara, atonement, so to speak, for everything, and the actuality of Yom Kippur itself gives kippur. Yesh averot shehen mitkaprim lish'atan. There are wrongs that are atoned for at the time. V'yesh averot she'en mitkaprin ela le'achar zman. And there are wrongs that are not atoned for until after a period of time. So let's break this down into a couple of things. The first is this idea of kippur or kappara, which we translate as atonement. The word atonement in English, I believe, is Shakespearean. It's made up of the words at one. So it's really a concept of overcoming separation. I think it was a coinage in Shakespeare's time, if not by Shakespeare himself. And certainly it goes back biblically to the idea that in the Torah, the accumulation of all of the community's wrongs would create over the course of the year, a separation between people and the divine. That was represented by the Ark in the Holy of Holies, where there'd be kind of a residue of all the wrongs that would happen outside in the camp in the world, that would accumulate on top of the cover of the ark where the tablets of the covenant were, and be a barrier between that and when the divine presence, which wants to come down and come to be a presence in the camp. And there was this ritual, which I'm not going to here, but which is in the book of Leviticus, which is the original Yom Kippur, which was a cleansing of that and a removal of that separation. So that's maybe one original meaning why we say atonement. There are a few different views as to what the essence of the word kippur means. One is that it means a cleansing. So in this sense, if there's kind of a spiritual schmutz, a residue that is in the community, or in the case of an individual, is kind of on you and is preventing you from feeling cleansed and being go out fully in a more pure spiritual state and a more purity of soul and character into life. So kappara is a process of at least achieving that, or existing in a state of more cleansed feeling. I think we use that term cleansed a lot in our colloquial speech. We understand what that means. Another view is that relates to the idea of ransom. So in the Torah, that word in not quite the same form is used as ransoming. And there is a view, and it's associated in the medieval Jewish tradition with Rambam, Rabbi Moses Maimonides, that all of the sacrifices in the Torah are to imagine that when we do certain kinds of wrongs, and in essence we have put our life on the line, we have put our souls, our very life on the line, that we don't deserve in some sense to live. And the sacrifice represents the near death that comes to us, either in reality or spiritually, by our wrong actions. And the sacrifice replaces something, kind of ransoms back our life. We get our life back. So I think, again, just as we have this metaphor of cleansing, we could have this idea of wrongs that make us feel like we're kind of separated from our life in some way, that it's been taken over by a wrong. And certainly this is more the case when a wrong is more serious or something that's more repeated. But even something we did once, which might have been just feel terrible to us or sticking with us, could have the sense that we need to get my life back. I need to feel back that it's my life, and it's not being dominated or ruled or taken by this particular wrong or this particular set of wrongs. So that's another idea of kippur. And then the third idea of kippur has to do with covering. So actually related to the Torah's ritual of Yom Kippur, the covering, which is made of gold and is over the Ark of the Covenant, and is on which sits the cherubs, which are the symbol of the divine throne, is called the kapporet. And in that sense, kind of, maybe it's a concept of acknowledging that we can never really 100% know that we've cleansed either ourselves or cleansed our movement in the world of the impact of all our wrongs, or the impact existentially of our wrongs, but nonetheless that we can do enough to cover it so that it's not the constant presence that it is. So I don't really care for this concept quite as much. I think it has a certain amount of truth. I think on Yom Kippur and in this season, we're really looking to do more than that, to be cleansed, and to certainly in a Maimonides sense to have our life back as something that we own and we can govern with our will. So those are the processes of Kippur. And I think that that one of the reasons that Maimonides is introducing all of his particular practices and his interpersonal practices by talking about confession and talking about Kippur is to really, again, focus on the inward experience of being a person who feels that we are living in the consciousness and the effects of our wrongs, and that in some way, which Maimonides in the tradition would say as us in the presence of the divine, as me in the speaking to God, or me approaching God with some kind of offering, is to try to take other people out of the equation, so that we can really focus on the part that's our own hearts. And that's what I've said in the first couple of teachings. And so if vidui is kind of the practice of being able to articulate and say exactly what it is, and to sort of come clean, there's that metaphor again, but just to do it through words, and to get it right, the statement of what it is that we are trying to change, then kappara is this process of getting that out of our system, of transforming ourselves. It could be transforming ourselves back into a person who's kind of rooted and has shalom, has a kind of peace and equilibrium. It could be of moving forward and trying to get ourselves out from under the impact of something that we know is something we're trying to confess and get out of, and that's the process of Kippur. And here what he's teaching about is that there is really reflective of two kinds of realities, that sometimes that process is short and sometimes that process is long. And even though there are things that we can kind of make clear work of, and even short work of, like get to the acknowledgement and get to the inner work of that, and it can be done, there are others as recognition that even when we do that, there are some things that can linger. And though we don't need to go into the details of all of this teaching, he talks about things which different categories of wrongs. He uses the Torah's categories of ways in which things are classified for punishments and sacrifices. But really what he's talking about is the severity of certain things, the centrality of certain things to our being. If we're really violating things which are kind of at our core beliefs or our core moral principles, that might be another kind of thing which is not, which the tshuva process and the the cleansing process and the confessing process is a part of. It gets us to a starting line, and then a certain amount of time. And one of the things that he says is that there is an awareness that maybe we have to get to Yom Kippur in order to feel that we've kind of completed a cycle, and to feel that is something from outside us we feel like could lift off that burden. I'm thinking Maimonides later on talks a little bit about the well, for instance, here's a teaching. He says, if avar adam al mitzvat aseh she'en ba karet, if a person passed, crossed a line with regard to an action, an act of commission, a mitzvah that they should have done, but they didn't do it, and it's a commandment that's not so severe that it was punished in the Torah by being cut off, then and he did tshuva, and he really has turned away from that. Eino zaz misham. He can't move from that place ad shemochalin lo until he's actually forgiven, and that means that there are certain kinds of things that are in the regular category, and there are plenty of them that we do actually need forgiveness for. And those kinds of things are properly, we can't really get to a point of being cleansed until we to make an attempt to confront that other person. Avar al mitzvat lo ta'aseh she'en ba karet. If it's a negative commandment, we did something we're not supposed to do, and but it's not one of those most severe, v'lo mitat beit din, not something that the Torah would have said has a death sentence. V'asat tshuva, and one did tshuva. Tshuva tola v'yom hakippurim mechaper. That's something where the tshuva is effective, but it's kind of, uses the word, it's hanging. It's sort of suspended out there until Yom Kippur comes. We did something we should have done. We do our tshuva, and then Yom Kippur comes and just helps us complete the process. And he goes on and kind of talks about other kinds of things. I think where I want to go is, actually, I want to skip over, frankly, some of these teachings where he talks about suffering and death and things that are that severe. Frankly, I don't think in the context of the. I'm hoping that nobody who's listening to this is in that category of having done things that require that kind of personal torment in order to come back in tshuva. So again, I'm hoping that the idea of kappara and both the idea of there's a process, things that we have to do, and then there's both a feeling and I think an existential state that we want to try to achieve that he's talking about, and then the acknowledgement that there are some things that the work itself works, and some things that actually require a period of time, that do require feedback from other people, or that do require the arrival of Yom Kippur to help us to complete that process, either because it's the cycle of time or the rituals and the surrounding of the community that help us to feel like we've put a completion on that. So we'll return in another conversation for next teaching, where Maimonides will really go into what are the actual practices that go into doing tshuva and knowing that you've done so. Thank you for participating in this 36 to life, and I hope you're able to take this and use this in some way for yourself.